Hello watch enthusiasts and welcome to the Watch Chronicler podcast. In today's episode I have a very interesting gentleman from Alsta Watches. Now Alsta is a brand which was founded at around about the middle of the 20th century, and it's a brand which has an interesting story as one of the smaller manufacturers of a variety of different pieces, but is most well known for its dive watches. And in fact they produce the dive watch worn in the 1975 movie Jaws, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And this is an aspect which has been quite major for the brand. But I enjoyed a discussion with Angus from Alsta a few months ago in London, back when it was possible, and we had a really good discussion and chat about the brand. And we've long been planning to record something together, a podcast being a good idea. And so today I bring you Angus to speak about the history of Alsta, and also about what Alsta is today after it's been brought back, very much in the spirit of what it originally was though. And so I hope you enjoy this piece. Now this was recorded via Skype as opposed to the normal way I'd record this, which is in the same room with a proper setup for recording audio and also some video. But due to the situation, this is just an audio show today as a result of the poor quality of Skype where video is concerned. But I hope you still enjoy it, and that you're able to draw some interesting points from understanding the deeper aspects of a small brand like this, and also a brand which is trying to produce the best quality product at a certain budget, which is I think more and more important in a world where watches are becoming more expensive, and I think enjoyment of them is more difficult if you don't want to spend the earth. But of course, do remember to like, share and subscribe if you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, and also follow us wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast, whether it's on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify or anywhere else. But without any further ado, I bring you Angus from Alsta Watches. So, it's fantastic to speak to you again, and we spoke a few months ago for the first time.
We did, and it's great to see you again, Armand. Your podcast series and your YouTube channel are required watching and listening at Alsta, so it's fantastic to be asked to come on and chat to you, so thank you.
Well, no, thank you very much for being here. It's very flattering to hear all these things about my work, and Watch Chronicler is a pleasure to run, especially when I get to speak to people like you. So it's been brilliant to see Alsta developing as well over the past few months. With new models, the bracelet we were just talking about before this call, which is now new really and available. But before we go into all of those sorts of details, it'd be really nice to speak about how you became inspired to bring back Alsta as a brand.
So at the beginning, I was a watch enthusiast and a watch collector. I still am a watch enthusiast, but it was really my love of watches developed in a traditional manner, I guess, of getting interested in vintage sports watches by the usual suspects, the Rolex sports watches, Omega sports watches, mainly from the 60s and 70s, and then got more involved in different brands, Jaeger-LeCoultre, Longines, and then one day, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so, I stumbled across a beautiful vintage dive watch from the 1960s by Alsta. It was the Nautoscaphe, the original Nautoscaphe, which I bought, and I was really taken by it, as I was and am by many vintage dive watches, especially by the independent and the smaller, lesser known brands. So this one was a bit of an outlier in my collection alongside better known names, and I guess really I just started to do a bit of digging to find out what they were up to. How could I find out some more models that were available? And then, of course, I realised that, like many brands, they fell victim to the quartz crisis of the 70s. The Alsta started in 1946, and really, it's in the early days it produced ladies' cocktail watches and dress watches, and then men's dressed watches, and moved into sports watches in the 1960s, and then into dive watches too. And they stopped producing watches in the late 70s, 1978. Finally closed up shop in 1982. And it's strange, I sometimes refer to the company as they as opposed to we, which is a bit strange, but I guess there was two different lives of Alsta. There was the going out of business, and then the resurrection, which I then did. So I guess the company went out of business in 1982, and nothing happened with it. And then I picked it up and acquired the brand and grew the brand into something that could be used as a platform to start remanufacturing watches. So in 2014, I started to put designs together for what the first watch might be. And the first watch then came out in late 2016, early 2017.
No, it's a very interesting story, because there are, as you say, two lives to the brand. But what you've been doing so far has been very much with a sense of respect to what was done before. And this leads me on actually to a different direction in this conversation, which is, what's your vision for this brand for the future? Because you've clearly been inspired by their history, by their previous models, and by this particular experience you had with one you were able to acquire. But what do you see as a vision for how you want this brand to exist and to be in the wider watch world?
Right. So my vision for the brand at the outset was to try to bring the romance back to watches. And what do I mean by that? Romance, really, I'm thinking more in the context of the mystery and allure and the glamour and the excitement of choosing, acquiring and owning watches. And I think that's something that some brands have and some brands don't have. And I wanted to make sure that we did stick to that and try and be a brand that does have, we do have backstory, we do have history. There is a little bit of glamour in there too, with some of the watches and who they were worn by, and eventually the Joyce connection as well. So I wanted to make sure that connection was kept alive. And the vision for the brand is to grow, obviously, but to not lose track of the fact that backstory and the excitement of owning a watch is where an awful lot of the value in a watch is. It's not necessarily in the tangible. It's not necessarily in what the movement is. It's in the whole thing. And in addition to having this bring romance back to watches, we also had the idea that watches had to be affordable. Bringing a new brand to market, or resurrecting an old brand, but bringing a brand to market and competing with well-established brands, it's difficult. It's difficult to compete with established brands and establish your place in the market. So I thought, we want to be in that. We want to be affordable. We want to be not a luxury brand. We want to be something that is perhaps in that £500 to £1,000 range. Anything more than that, and we're competing with the used Tag Heuer or Omega market, and any less than that, we're competing with the high quality, high volume Japanese market, for example. So we wanted to fit somewhere in that £500 to £1,000 range, despite the fact I was advised by many people in the watch industry to avoid that price range, because that's the dead zone. No one wants to be in there. That's where I want to be. And that's where I know that lots of our customers want to be in there too. So I set off to start to develop the brand with respect and a nod to the past, but not just doing carbon copies of the past, using up-to-date technology, modern technology and materials in the watches to take past designs but bring them up to date. So the choices that I had when looking at that price range, that £500 to £1,000 range, was, do I put a Swiss movement into let's call it a lower quality watch?
Yeah.
Or do I keep the watch high quality and put a non-Swiss movement into it in order to keep it at that price point? And I thought, well, what would I want as a watch enthusiast and watch owner? What would I want? And I decided that I wanted a watch that was as good quality as possible, not just the movement, but the rest of the watch, because there is more to a watch than a movement. I wanted it to be as high quality and as good an execution as possible, with a solid, reliable movement. And if it's not Swiss, it's not Swiss.
It's a very interesting perspective you take, actually, because in some ways, and I've been thinking about this in days prior to to this chat, it does seem as though you're producing something which is, it slots into the sort of role which original watches from the period would have, in the sense that the origin of the movement and these sorts of things weren't the priority. I think the enthusiast was a very different one back then. And so what you're offering is something which is high quality, and because of the price range, you can still enjoy it. There's not the sort of threat of sort of financial association with a product. It is, in your case, a dive watch, an enjoyable dive watch. And I mean, I've handled your products in the past, and you do feel the quality. And the whole movement question is one which we've discussed, which has been, I think, on the lips of a lot of journalists and manufacturers recently, often arguing different points. But it is an interesting perspective to take, because I think that recently there's been such a skewed view of how much a movement costs and where the costs for producing a watch as a whole go. Certainly, when you see as many watches as I tend to, because of the way I work and so on, I do learn to see where you can see the savings being executed.
Exactly.
And often that is noticeable. So it's refreshing to be able to speak about it. And I mean, in the case of Japanese movements, you see a similar architecture on Seikos, which are at the lower end and higher end. It's a refinement as opposed to an entire change. And I think this puts your watches in a very particular position, which is interesting and quite exciting.
Yeah. There's been a small handful of people have said to us since we started, "Oh, if only it had a Swiss movement, I'd buy one." And I say, well, that's kind of missing the point. It's not our proposition is not that.
Yeah.
Our proposition is something different. And all of the hundreds of people who have bought our watches since we relaunched, they buy it for exactly what it is, a high quality watch where most of the cost goes into the R&D and the prototyping and the manufacturing and the testing and the assembly and the execution of the watch, which is all, it's not insignificant cost to have all of that done, especially when we do it, all of it in Switzerland. And things like the things that no one thinks about, the box, for example, that the new watch comes in, the Italian Cordovan leather box. I mean, they're not £2 to produce, or the pouch that the some of the other watches come in. I mean, that's all part of the package. And in future, we will be spending more time and money on improving some of the peripheral things like the warranty cards and just all the little things that make up the package. We're going to improve those, but we were determined that more of the cost of production was going to go into making a robust, high quality watch with a high quality movement. It's a Seiko movement, which experience so far has told us that it's a solid movement, because of the 500 or 600 or so watches we've sold since restarting the brand, I think we've had 2 movement failures, and one of them actually wasn't a failure. But we've had one failure and 2 failures. Let's call it 2 failures out of probably 600 plus watches, which is not bad.
Well, it's one of those impressive things actually that I have found with Japanese, with recent generation Japanese movements, whether you look at Miyota or Seiko, is that, and I'm not, I don't stay quiet about this sort of thing because actually it's important. A movement like the ETA 2824, if you look at the Swiss side, it's known for having some quite significant problems with it, which remain in the architecture. Whereas I think that the Japanese have taken a more pragmatic approach in recent years with their movements, and the figures do speak for themselves. I mean, I know that on average, your average sort of Seiko or Miyota movement has roughly a third of the failure rate of the equivalent grade ETA, which is eye-opening.
Yes.
It really is eye-opening.
Absolutely. And that's not to say, you asked a few minutes ago what my vision is for the brand.
Yeah.
I talked about the vision for the brand, but the vision for the production of what timepieces we're going to make, and where they're going to be made, and what they might contain in terms of movement.
Yeah.
I mean, those are things because we use Seiko now doesn't mean we will always use Seiko. I
Sure.
think it's a good. It fits our proposition. It fits where we are. But does that mean that all of our watch models in future will always be Seiko? Possibly not. I don't know,
Yeah.
but that's something that will develop. I'm determined that the watches are still going to be made well, and we're not going to compromise on the quality of the rest of the watch, because if we decide in future to put Swiss movements in some of our watches, we're not going to compromise on the rest of the watch in order to keep the price down. It will be a simple case of it will cost the watch will cost a lot more.
No, that's an understandable perspective to take. I think that once you start to compromise the quality of the brand, it spoils the overall view, the overall vision, which I think is an important side to the enjoyment of the watch. I think that as a buyer, it's important to be comfortable with the way a brand practices, being comfortable with the way in which watches are manufactured, are produced, is an important side, which you think about when you have it on your wrist. Considering the fact that your watches have such a wide production base in terms of you've found suppliers around the world to produce exactly the right component. We spoke about this a bit previously. And also there's a significant portion of your watches made in Switzerland. How have you found the right suppliers to produce the correct components and parts to be of the quality you're expecting?
Finding the right suppliers is the reason why there was a gap of almost 3 years between me resurrecting the brand and bringing the first watch out, because I had to spend time visiting suppliers, getting prototypes made, lots of prototypes and components going into the bin, and just really working on it, and trying different suppliers for different things. So even going to factories that make the glass. So when we did our first, the Nautoscaphe 2, we wanted to have the domed crystal on it, and getting the domed crystal manufactured was difficult. I don't know if it's difficult for the big groups who manufacture tens of thousands of watches, but for an independent like us, it was difficult. So we had to have prototypes made and thrown away, and eventually got the right one. And the same applied to other things like crowns and dials and hands. So it was really just a bit of legwork and investing some time and money and getting prototypes made and finding out which suppliers were going to be reliable. And the same when it comes to things like assembly and testing. We try different resources and settle on one that we think understands what we're trying to do and is sympathetic to an independent brand. So bit of trial and error, bit of testing, little bit of money and time spent on that, and then going for it. And as far as the so the components of the watch, that was really the hardest bit. I settled on the movement pretty early on. And then the other bits and pieces, the stuff that's not actually the watch itself, so things like straps and boxes, again, getting prototypes and finding out what fits. And I was determined to, where I could, use, if I can, use small independent manufacturers for things like boxes, pouches, the outer boxes, which are made in the UK. So I wanted to try and keep it as independent and manageable as possible.
No, that's understandable, especially considering the product you're offering is off the beaten track for a lot of people in terms of the brands they know, and so that this whole backstory is I think a really important side to the brand.
Yes.
It was a pleasure to speak about this actually a few months ago, so it's nice to hear how things have progressed as well. And certainly your collection is sort of rounding off in terms of different pieces. I remember the one piece which surprised me actually when I first saw it was the fact that you'd taken inspiration from not just diving but skiing and surfing, which is I think a glamorous side to the brand, and something which a lot of people haven't come across, a watch with that format but for a different application.
Yes, absolutely. No, we thought we would try to bring back watches that Alsta was known for in its heyday. In future, and part of the vision of the brand will be to do some new things and do modern takes on old ideas. And the Surf and Ski was another interesting one from the back catalogue that I owned. I owned an original version of, which was a beautiful, beautiful watch. And the original was in stainless steel.
Yeah.
And I fancied seeing it in PVD coated. And a couple of people in the industry said to me, "No, I wouldn't do that if I were you, because PVD watches and black watches tend to not sell anywhere near as well as steel watches." And I thought, well, I want one in black. So we're going to do it in black, and we'll see. The good thing about being independent and being the fact that I'm not told by anyone what to do. I don't have investors telling me how many sales I need to be producing every quarter. It means that I can take these risks. And if the Surf and Ski didn't sell because it was in black instead of steel, it didn't sell. That was just a mistake noted. But as it turned out, it has sold, and it has sold well. It's a slight departure from, we're known for dive watches, and we're going to continue concentrating on the dive watch range, but throwing other things in. Every now and again we'll bring a watch out, like we did some beautiful chronographs in the 60s as well, and we will look at doing bringing a chronograph out at some point. But for the moment, people seem to get excited and tell us that they love our dive watches. So when are we doing another dive watch, or when are we doing another iteration of the Nautoscaphe? There were probably around 12 or 13 different variations of the Nautoscaphe that I've seen, and so there's plenty there to be getting on with. But no, you're right, that little twist, and again the romance and the glamour we talked about earlier, that is brought about by a watch called a Surf and Ski, and one that I've got an old advert somewhere of when the watch came out, and it was a glamorous couple in their all-in-one ski suit, and one of them with a glass in hand and the other one checking the time, and it's just thought, let's try that.
It's a nice departure, and I think that the with this brand, actually it's not so much an elephant in the room, more of a shark in the room, is the Jaws connection, which has been developing over the last few months, certainly with what you've shown of new designs, and you've now recreated the model used it, and that was 1975, wasn't it? The film, it was,
it was. It was. The film came out in 75. The watch came out in 70.
Right. Okay, so it had already been in circulation for a period before that.
It had, and the watch was used, famously used, I think, by accident in the movie, and that's a connection that I like and our customers love.
Yeah.
So we continue revisiting that. I think that, I don't know, it maybe has a shelf life. I don't know. We'll see. Our customers will tell us when they've had enough of it. So for the moment, they seem to be enjoying it and loving the connection, especially now, as you said there, that the watch with the brace executed with the bracelet
Yes.
is coming out.
No, it's a very interesting connection. There aren't that many brands who can which can position themselves in that kind of space. I think that whether it's by chance or by design, really, that a lot of the more successful brands at the moment have a certain connection to the past. It does help with the image. It does provide some of the magic, which is whatever anyone says is involved in the ownership of a watch. It's a watch is something which you buy to enjoy.
And I'm happy that it was an accident. Because look at Aston Martin, for example. That was an accident, wasn't it? And that being the Bond car.
Yeah.
So our watch was a Jaws watch by accident, and I love it. And when people talk about it, it gives me so much pleasure. There was a episode of one of the Jason Heaton and James Stacey podcasts, the Grey where they were talking about famous movie watches, and we were name checked in that. And of course, being a small independent brand, that is just so exciting for us.
Absolutely,
that is just awesome.
And it's nice that you've honoured it with a certain quality to approach that. And I think the pricing and the position in the market is a difficult one. And we've spoken now about the fact that putting yourself in that £500 to £1,000 sort of range is a complicated one. But even so, I think that it's one which is quite important, because it is, after all, a price range which a lot of people go to once they've had maybe their first dive watch. They want something longer lasting. I don't think that many people will jump to a sort of Tudor level or mid-range Longines sort of level in the high thousands or £2,000. I think that a lot of people do like to go for that price range. So it means that you can appeal to the collector and someone who's perhaps entering a period in their life when they're going to enjoy watches.
Yeah, absolutely, and that could then start a whole different conversation about are we in the same market as those brands that you just mentioned, or are we in a totally different space from them? We both happen to make watches, but is it a completely different space? I don't know. I imagine there are collectors out there who own the Tudors and Longines, but are also excited by independence. Equally, there are other collectors who just go for independence.
Yes. Well, that's one thing which you can expect in the watch world. There's always variety in what people enjoy. I think that what we see from people on forums, for example, or even on social media, actually is quite a small swathe of the market, really. Because there are so many people who just enjoy watches for the sake of enjoying watches, and so it's always great to see, well, not new, but rethought out brands like yours. Now, I think at this point, we've discussed at length the brand and where you are at the moment. But as a final note, where do you see Alsta in 5 years?
I would love to think that we're still true to the values that we started with when we kicked the brand off again, which was to still maintain that quality, still have a backstory and have some excitement in putting one of our watches on, which our customers tell us all the time that they do, and they post on social media and send us pictures of them wearing the watch in various locations, and we love that. We want that to continue for sure. I think that the dive watch connection will remain and deepen, because that's something that our customers are telling us. We just think that's something that you do really well. So I think we will go further down that rabbit hole of dive watches and expanding the range and different iterations, different movements, and throwing in other sports models as well. I'd love to have I'd love to have a chronograph.
Yes.
I'd love to maybe do a GMT or an alarm watch. We did a really
Yes.
nice alarm watch in the early 1960s, the 50s and early 60s,
Mm.
which was similar to the Memovox or the
Yes.
Cricket, that type of.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful watch that Alsta did called the Billet.
Mm.
So I'd love to explore those lesser known areas of watch collecting, and really continue developing the brand as a watch lover.
Anyway, I'll conclude the podcast there, but I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and really I thank Angus for the opportunity to speak to him about this, since I think he's a very interesting individual, and one who really understands the background to building up a brand like this. And Alsta themselves as a brand are very interesting, and I look forward to seeing what they do in future. But leave your comments down below, and any thoughts about Alsta and about our discussion, because I'm sure that any further questions would happily be answered by either of us. So thank you very much for listening. This is Armand from WatchChronicle.com, out.